Hey guys, it's Jang from the always friendly forums at ultimaterc.com, or at least in this case it's just my hand, sharing some tips about soldering. Now this is not going to be the end-all be-all about how to solder. It's not going to be a full tutorial. It will not be all of the information there is to know about soldering. It's just a bunch of tips that I have picked up over the past couple decades of soldering that I thought would be hopefully helpful to all of you. Now, a really important aspect of soldering is having the right iron for what you're doing. So this is a 30-watt Hobbyco iron that I haven't used in a while, and it has a pointed tip. And that's okay mostly for smaller items. If you're working on especially 1/18th scale electronics or switches, or creating your own patch for a servo cable or something like that. But generally you want to use something with a little bit more power. I really recommend, if you're buying an iron for the first time, get something with at least 50 watt, let's say maybe a 60 watt power rating on it. What I actually use, my mainstay, is this Weller. This is a 80 watt soldering iron. You can also get the more high-end variable ones that allow you to choose your wattage or choose your heat. The tip that you choose is very important. Over on the left you see I've got a pointed or pencil tip. Over on the right, the one that I use most of the time, has a chisel tip. The smaller ones allow you to get into a smaller space, so you can, you have more precision to where you're placing your heat. But the smaller ones have less volume of just metal material to them, and what that translates to is less total heat stored in the tip itself. As soon as you touch your soldering iron tip to something that can absorb heat, it starts to lose heat, and the tip will actually become much colder than the normal operating temperature. The larger the tip you have, the more heat is stored there, and the longer you can hold it to an object without the tip becoming cold and to the point where you have to pull it away and wait for it to warm up again. The most important accessory tool to use when soldering is a wet sponge. As you touch your soldering iron, your tip, to various objects, it will pick up impurities, oils, and little bits of melted plastic from insulation and other such, and all that will gunk up the tip. So your tip can start to look pretty nasty pretty quickly. But a quick run over a wet sponge will get it nice and shiny again, and that will allow you to get a very quick transfer of heat to solder or to the wire or whatever object that you're soldering on. Now, if the tip of your soldering iron gets really nasty, there's a tip cleaner paste that you can find in many places where soldering supplies are sold. I got this one from Radio Shack. It just gets in there, and it's really concentrated flux with, I believe, a little bit of solder mixed into it. And what it does is it just cleans off the tip chemically very quickly. And in my case, I have such a hot soldering iron that it's burning some of the cleaning material also, but you can see that very quickly it turned into a nice, beautiful, tinned, silvery surface. Another thing that's helpful is if you get really bad, if you get some pitting or just some debris and blackness that's really corroded and built up on the tip, use a wire brush. Get the soldering iron nice and hot and just run your brush over it. Make sure you do this away from you. This will really help you to get in there and clean it up pretty thoroughly. It's also useful to have a nice tool to help you with soldering, and that's why I use this thing. It's called a third hand. There's just a base, and then there are a couple alligator clips with some posable arms, and that allows you to hold things. And normally it would have a a magnifying glass in the center. That can be useful for getting into, looking at things a little bit more closely and having more precision over where you're going. In my case, I took 2 third-hand devices and took one of the arms from the second one and actually added it on here, so I've got a total of 3 extra hands here. What they call a third hand is when you have 2 of them, so I guess this is a 3.5 hand, and that just helps you to hold one object, maybe a piece of wire, hold another object, maybe a connector that you want to apply some solder to. You can line them up and get them exactly where you want them to be, and then it'll just hold it for you. And then, you've got one hand to hold the soldering iron, one hand to hold the solder with, and it's like having 2 people working together. Ideally, when you're making a solder joint, you want to have maximum just physical contact between the 2 objects. You don't want to have a gap and then fill that up with solder, because solder has more resistance than the wire does. You want to get that down there nice and flat, push it on there if at all possible, get maximum contact between all those braids of the wire and the surface of the connector that I'm connecting it to. Use solder really to hold it down more than anything. You don't want to use solder as a gap filling glue. When you're soldering, I want you to note that you always want to have both surfaces primed with solder in advance, just like you would with the tip of your iron. You want to have some solder on that. You want to have it tinned. You also want to have solder on the object that you're looking to connect. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here and tin, what they call tinning, again, the wire. And now I'm just going to use something from the top to push this down, because I'm applying heat from underneath, and the heat is going to go right through into the wire. The solder on the wire is now melted, and now I'm just applying a little bit of pressure from the top. I'm sorry if this didn't focus entirely well, but hopefully you got the picture there. Both surfaces were tinned. They had solder on them in advance, and then I applied heat to one of them and applied pressure to hold the 2 together. And what that's doing is, in this case, it was pushing the wire down onto the surface of the connector. Like I said, you want to have maximum contact between the wire and the connector or the other surface. So just by pushing it down, that really helps with that, to get more of those wire braids to get in contact with it, to really push through the solder and make direct contact. And of course, whenever you solder things together and you have an exposed joint like that, it's very useful and actually very important to use a little bit of heat shrink tubing. Just slip that right on over there, and then you can use the heat from your soldering iron. Just don't touch it, just put it underneath to help it shrink up, or you can use a lighter is a good easy thing for that. Just don't have it sitting there directly over, just move it back and forth, make sure it doesn't burn, and that just gives you a nice safe covering which prevents accidental shorts from occurring. When you're ready to put the iron away, rather than just immediately just turning it off, take some solder, just plenty of extra, and just completely coat the tip, and some of it will probably drip off, and that provides a protective coat so that the next time it is time for you to take out your soldering iron, all you have to do is heat it up, get some of that extra solder off of there. It's still going to look really bad, but then wipe it off with your sponge, and there you go. Perfectly clean tip that's ready to go, pre-tinned and everything. And that just about does it. Hope that helped you out. And if you have any other tips that you come up with, or if you have other questions about soldering that are not answered in other videos that I do, please be sure to post up your questions or comments on the forums at ultimaterc.com, and I will see you there, and I will see you next time. Thanks.